One of the big surprises of the 2020 election was that the immigrant population moved towards the right. They voted for Donald Trump. Why? My next guest has written a memoir about the conservatism of immigrants. He's a New York Times best-selling author. Stay tuned to learn more. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. It's the show where we can talk about anything and everything. My guest today is Eric Metaxas. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know who Eric is. He's had 5 best-selling books, and he's going to talk about his memoir, what happens when a biographer writes his own biography. Eric, it's so exciting to have you on my show for the first time. The last time we talked, it was at a meeting, a conference, the Council on National Policy, where you were the keynote speaker.
Was I? Because they didn't pay me anything. I have to joke, Carol. Anytime I see you, I'm happy. It's better to see you in person, but it's an honor to be on your program. You know how well I think of you and of the work you do. Thank you for having me.
Now, I know that most conservatives will recognize your name, but many of them may not have heard your testimony, and I'm not sure that I've heard it. Could you briefly just introduce our viewers to who you are?
Well, it's complicated, which is why I wrote this book, Fish Out of Water. It's basically the story of my life until my 25th birthday, when I had a miraculous conversion, Jesus dream, absolutely miraculous, not interesting or a blessing, but just mind-blowing miracle that changed me literally overnight, from not even knowing if you could believe or know God to knowing him and knowing that I knew him. I just didn't think intellectually it was possible, that people were kidding themselves. So my life changed around my 25th birthday. And the fact is that in order to understand the dream, which I won't tell on this program.
Right, please don't.
In order to understand it, you have to understand what leads up to it, because it's the context. God used a number of these elements in my life and wove something together that was just mind-blowing. And I have to say that, because I experienced it, it just changed everything instantly. And so I thought, I want to write a book that tells that story so that the reader of the book, Fish Out of Water, will be tracking and will get the punchline with the full power, so to speak. So really what my story is, that my mom and dad grew up in Europe. My mom grew up in Germany. My dad grew up in Greece. They met in an English class in New York City.
Eric, I asked you the wrong first question, because I don't want you to give away your whole book yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We want people to buy the book.
Did I give you the part you're looking for?
Well, I mean, I like the fact that you had this dramatic conversion experience. It sounds like Paul on the road to Damascus, because as an intellectual, a lot of times, you really do need something unusual to bring you to Christ.
Exactly.
So it sounds like that's
right.
What happened to you.
That's exactly what happened to me. And you're quite right. I mean, because, I grew up in a working class background, but then I went to Yale University, and I suddenly experienced that world of political correctness. This was in the 80s, and, the cultural elite world. And I really got kind of messed up, because they're not talking about the meaning of life. They're talking about the meaninglessness of life, even though they don't talk about it. And so when I graduated with my English degree, I just floundered and floated and really was lost. I was lost. I'd been educated beyond the ability to believe in these basic things, like love of country, that I could know God personally. I was just sure that if you were educated, you could not know those things. And so I was really tortured. And
right,
it is true that God had to, I always say it's kind of like I was in a room and God had to punch a hole in the sheetrock and say, I'm here. It had to be him coming in and blowing my mind. And if it had been anything else, I don't know, I'd still be spinning around in my confusion.
Well, most people heard of you first when you wrote the Bonhoeffer book. Was that the first book you wrote after your conversion experience? And what's the
No.
backstory of that book?
Yeah, well, no, it's funny. I mean, look, when I graduated Yale, I was an English major and I wanted to be a writer. So I floundered around my 25th birthday. I had this dream and I still wanted to be a writer. But now I said, okay, Lord, guide me in my career. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to write. What do you want me to write? And he took me on this very strange path that culminated in a way in Bonhoeffer. I was a writer. I wrote for Veggie Tales. I worked for Chuck Colson. I think that's the first time I met you.
Veggie Tales?
Yes.
What did you write for Veggie Tales?
I wrote half of Lyle the Kindly Viking. I wrote the Hamlet omelet parody for Veggie Tales. And I wrote, no laughing, this is serious. And then I'm the voice of the narrator on the Esther video. If you watch the Esther video, I'm the narrator. And then I wrote a lot of books for them. God Made You Special and stuff. But, I'm not like a creator of Veggie Tales. Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki, they are Veggie Tales. But I had the honor of working with them and being part of that. I worked for Chuck Colson, my hero. Incredible.
Well, it sounds like you really worked your way up.
Oh, listen, I struggled. I want to be blunt. I was just sharing with a friend yesterday. He was telling me that a year and a half ago we had dinner and I told my story to him and he said it encouraged him because he didn't know how much I had struggled. I struggled horribly. This is after I became a believer. I'm trying to be a writer. It was really, really tough. And I never would have wanted to write. If you asked me, you think you'll ever write a biography? I would have said, absolutely not. I don't see that happening. I'm far too self-centered to want to spend 2 years focused on some other person, but God had different plans. So the Lord led me to write a biography of William Wilberforce, the great hero who led the battle for the abolition of the slave trade. And it was after that I thought, you know what? My mother's from Germany. I've heard the story about Bonhoeffer. My grandfather was killed in the war. He didn't want to fight in the war. Many Germans were not on board with Hitler. This is a beautiful story of a man who, because of his Christian faith, spoke against Hitler. And so it was a personal thing for me. But I had written a number of books before that. But that was the book that changed my life. That kind of opened the doors where suddenly everybody was talking about Bonhoeffer and saying, oh, we didn't know about Eric Metaxas. And I thought, well, I've been laboring quietly here in the salt mines, for years. But this was the book that kind of broke things open for me by God's grace. So a lot of people know me through the Bonhoeffer book, and that led to me speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast with President Obama and everybody. That was kind of a moment for me. So by now I've written many, many books, children's books, all kinds of books. But Bonhoeffer book is what really, by God's grace, opened the door for me. And of course, when I was writing it, in a weird way, it's like a prophetic book because
I know
our times, unfortunately, mirror the beginnings of trouble, so to speak.
You're right.
In Germany.
You're right. And I know from being on the 1776 commission that President Trump appointed, on his way out, that was to look at history, that historians, they really go after writers that don't have the historical stamp of approval. And I made the comment that they they overrate themselves.
That's an understatement. They came after me like nobody's business. I know we're at a time in the segment, but I know.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we return, more with your story.
Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain is made possible by Cooper Steel, a family-owned business that provides the steel fabrications for some of the greatest buildings across the United States. 60 years ago, Kenneth and Faye Cooper founded their company in Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Cooper Steel believes in sponsoring Carol Swain because we believe as she does, you build strong, you stand strong.
What started as a vision and now a nationally recognized and operated company that remains true to its founders' Judeo-Christian values and principles. Cooper Steel is committed to excellence, responsibility, and community. Cooper Steel's motto is, build strong, stand strong. They treat their employees and customers like family. Thank you to Cooper Steel for standing strong with Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. Learn more about our generous sponsor at coopersteel.com.
Welcome back to Conversations. My guest is Eric Metaxas. We're having too much fun. And Eric, tell us a little bit about your new book, because you've been writing biographies on everyone else, and then all of a sudden you decide to write your memoir. How did that come about?
Well, it's funny, Carol, because honestly, I've wanted to tell the story of my life and of coming to faith for a long time. I wrote a rough draft of this in the summer of 2001, and I kept thinking that's the book that's going to be my first serious book. Well, God had other plans, but I've wanted to tell the story because, look, it's a genuine miracle story. What happens to me at the end of the book, I don't know how else anyone can make sense of it. It's
Right.
a profound, life-changing miracle. I've never experienced anything even close to it. And the fact is that it happened. And I thought, in order to tell that, I really do have to tell my life story. But then I thought, you know what? My life story is interesting, because how many people grow up with a Greek father and a German mother in an immigrant household, working class immigrant household? How many people know the loony world of the Greek immigrant experience? People think of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. That ain't it. That's kind of like, I think of that as the tacky cartoon version, Chicago version. I'm a New Yorker, and I kind of think it's really a rich, amazing community and story. But the reason the title of the book is Fish Out of Water is in part because since my mother was German, I never really fit in totally in the Greek community. I felt like I was not Greek enough. And Greeks are very proud about being Greek. They know they're the best ethnicity. They can't help it. And so their attitude is like, you're not, are you really Greek? Do you speak Greek at home? And I was like, no, we speak English at home because my mother's German. My parents, met in an English class. So it was an interesting thing. Then when I'm hanging out with the Germans, because my mother is German, from Germany, I don't really feel that German. And then when we moved to Connecticut, Danbury, Connecticut, which is again working class, wonderful community. I didn't feel that American. I felt like I'm the ethnic kid from Queens because I grew up in Queens, New York, and so I always felt like a fish out of water in some sense. But I knew these stories. Some of them.
I really like your title.
Well, thank you very much. Some of the stories I've been telling my whole life because they're just so funny. And I thought, I want to put these in a book. These are just funny stories. You can't get around it. I mean, these are hilarious. Some of them just hilarious stories. Some of it is very vulnerable and very serious, but a lot of it is just loony experiences from my life, including the jobs that I had as a young man, that were just, you won't even believe it, but every syllable is true. And I
want to break in for a second.
Fun. Yeah.
I want to break in for a second because I think it's interesting how long it took you to write your story, because all of my life people have been telling me I should write my memoir. And every time I tried to write it, it just didn't work out. And I think, it was too soon. And God knows exactly when you're supposed to write it. And like my memoir, I wouldn't call it Fish Out of Water, but I felt like I was an alien dropped out of space in this strange family, that I had nothing in common with. I was a participant observer in my own family. And so I think there's something about people who God calls that we don't fit in so well. We are very unusual, but the timing of the memoir, I believe God controls that.
I think you're right. And I always joke around about this, like people say, well, it was a learning experience and God wanted to use it, whatever. And I go, listen, I hate learning. It's painful, but if God wants it, I'm all for it. And I say that about the book too. If it was up to me, it would have come out 20 years ago, but the Lord's ways really are not our ways. He has his plans. And I have to say that I have very little doubt that he knows better how our careers should roll out than we do. So I do accept that. But what you just said though about your life, it is interesting that you're a fish out of water. A lot of people identify with that idea of being a fish out of water. And just knowing your story, I realized that is often the story of people that got calls. So I think that's not a bad thing.
Now I have another question. Like when you actually wrote your memoir, was it one of those books, it just flowed out and, you're very prolific. You've already had 5 New York Times best-selling not novels. But how do you write? I mean, did you just write it in 3 months, or were you working on it for a longer period of time?
I have to say, without any doubt, every book is different, and most books are strange for me to write. I don't recommend the way that I write. It's just how I have to get things done. But I'll tell you what, the thing about this book that gave me problems was that I could just write every memory that I had, and
Right.
maybe I think it's interesting, but it really was. It's kind of like the wood needs to be seasoned. It's got to sit out there. I had to, in a way, go over it over and over and over again to really feel, does this story carry itself to a reader who doesn't know anything, who doesn't know my family? And that really is different from most of the books that I do. To write something that you're so close to, it's so personal that you can't get the distance on it. So for me, I kind of had to polish the writing more and more and more and more to tighten it up, just to make sure that it was worthy of being in there. And I mean, people say that it's a quick read and it sucks you in or whatever. And that
Good.
didn't happen on the first draft.
Well, I can also say that with memoirs, like every time I've tried to write mine, I started with when I was born and my childhood. And then I realized that that's not how you do it. And you can have more than one memoir, and that the purpose, the audience, we have many different stories in us. And so I guess you've just written the first of what may be many.
Definitely the first of at least two, I'll tell you, because I did want this book to culminate in this miraculous dream. It's a dream about a golden fish, and the title, Fish Out of Water, you realize, and this is God's stunning creativity, but that is kind of the answer at the end. I won't give it away, but I did want to end there, and I had so many other stories to tell. And
we're going to have to take a break.
Oh yes.
I'm sorry about interrupting you. We're going to take a break. When we return, you can pick up right where you left off.
Dr. Carol Swain's Be the People, a call to reclaim America's faith and promise, newly released in paperback and audio with a new introduction, is a challenge to all Americans. If you are serious about being the best citizen you can be, this is the book for you. From addressing moral relativism to reclaiming the future, you'll understand why Dr. Swain is one of the most relevant voices in today's culture war. Are you ready to reclaim America's faith and promise? Purchase at bethepeoplenews.com/books or wherever books are sold.
The Biden administration's executive order on immigration brings to the forefront one of the most volatile issues of our time. In this timely second edition of Debating Immigration, I join my voice to that of other experts to provide you with facts and information that will help you understand what is at stake for our nation. This edition offers 21 original essays that cover race, religion, economics, human smuggling, and civil rights.
Purchase at bethepeoplenews.com/books or wherever books are sold.
I'm back with my guest, Eric Metaxas. And Eric, I'm sorry that I cut you off. You had a thought you wanted to complete. So
well, we're friends, Carol. That's the job of friends, is to cut off their friends when they're at a time. I don't even remember what I was talking about. I'm horrified. Does anyone remember? This is what happens, right? When you take a break.
We were talking about your book, and writing it and having more than one memoir.
Oh, yes. Okay, here's what I was going to say. When I started writing all these stories, it just kind of got out of control, because I thought, I'm a writer. I tell stories about everything that happens in my life. And it became a problem. I thought, I can't write, an 800-page memoir. I mean, I could, but if I want to sell some copies, which obviously I do, I can't do that. And also, I didn't say this. I want this to be an evangelistic tool. In other words, I think my fellow Christians will really enjoy this, but it's not a book that I wrote principally for people who are on the same theological page as I am. I wrote this book so that people who are on the same page as I am can give it to somebody who likes to read books, but would not read a Christian book. If you give them a Lee Strobel book or whatever, they say, that's not for me. That's not for me. I thought, I want to reach those people. I want to reach people where I was in the secular world, not really that comfortable with, the kind of evangelicals or whatever, but at the same time, looking for the meaning of life, right? So I wanted the book to culminate in that story where I'm 25 years old. And then I thought to myself, okay, I've done it. I'm happy, but I have so many miracle stories that happened after I became a Christian. I mean, real miracle stories. Nothing life-changing like the dream, because you can only,
Right.
have a conversion one time. But I have so many stories that are just, they're eye-popping, crazy stories. So I will write a second volume, and not anytime soon. Probably a year from now, I'll start it or something. But I want to tell that side of the story, the faith side of the story. And you know what? Maybe people, secular readers who read this book, would read that book because they like my writing, and it can give them a picture of what it is, to walk with God in our brokenness, in the joys and the trials and all that stuff.
Well, Eric, my coming to Christ also was like Paul on the road to Damascus experience. I was always spiritual, but it was more like one God, many paths. And I don't know if my first memoir will go so deeply into that, but I've lived a life of miracles since coming to Christ in my 40s. And so there is the place for a book that's just about miracles. So I can really relate to you, your story, your path, and the impact that you're having on America, and especially younger people.
Well, I have to tell you, Carol, that, I might be far from young, but thank you for being slightly confused for a moment. I appreciate that.
From where I am, you're young.
That fills me up. But in all seriousness, I joke around a lot, and that's reflected in the book. I like to joke around. I can't help it. I can get very serious, as you know, and I've been very outspoken about the cancel culture and about the cultural Marxism. You and I have talked about this on my radio program, about trying to stifle dissent and how we're moving away dramatically from the fundamental values of our nation. And this is not just some nation. This is the United States of America, which has been a beacon of liberty around the world. And because of our own prosperity in this country, we've been able to share our liberty, like the shining city on a hill from John Winthrop's sermon and Jesus's parable. So I guess that comes out in the book, even though I was not officially a Christian growing up. My parents, because they came from communist countries, or I should say my mother came from East Germany, which had become East Germany by the time the war was over. And my father, at the end of the war in Greece, they had the communists fighting, and there was a civil war in Greece. So my parents taught me all my life growing up as part of this immigrant experience to hate communism, to know communism is wicked, it is godless. They really didn't even try, but it just became part of who I am. And so I saw the evil in the world, and I knew things could get very bad. And I think my fellow Americans oftentimes didn't get that. They thought everything's fine, America's great. And I really find it interesting that now, later in life, I'm talking about these issues and I'm trying to wake people up to where we are. And as we said earlier, my Bonhoeffer book further kind of honed this point of what can happen when people take their eyes off of God and take their eyes off of his principles and slide leftward into what ultimately becomes Marxism. So it's something I talk about a lot now, but I realize it kind of came out of my parents and my story growing up. It's just something that, it fires me up, as you know, today.
And the other thing that I think is important about the times that we're living in, many of us never thought in America we would see persecution of Christians and people losing their jobs and their livelihoods because of their faith. And yet that's where we are right now in America. And I think that you and me, people like us that have gone through a lot, that we are well equipped for the battle that lies ahead.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And I have to say, I mean, literally now as we are speaking this minute, I have been locked out of Twitter. Why?
Oh, no.
Because I had the temerity, listen to this, to post, the main sponsor of my radio program is Mike Lindell, My Pillow. And there's also mystore.com, which is related to it.
Right.
And they carry my books at mystore.com. And I just mentioned this for mentioning Mike Lindell, whom they think of as, somebody who is fomenting violent insurrection, which of course is lunacy, for mentioning him and saying, go to mypillow.com, go to mystore.com, use my code Eric because he's my main sponsor.
Right.
I was just trying to steer people to my books. They locked me out because they are so vicious. And I thought, if Americans do not wake up to this, we need to wake up. We need to fight back. We need to be loud and say, we will not accept this in America. And many of my fellow Christians in particular, they don't seem to get this. We need to get this. Bonhoeffer was trying to warn the German church in his day. He failed. We cannot fail.
I agree 100%. And I have my own Mike Lindell story. LinkedIn locked me out over the weekend, and I was out of my LinkedIn account for a couple of days because I shared the Mike Lindell link to the special. And I had also tweeted something about what was taking place in the States regarding the election investigations. Now, let me tell you how I handled it. I appealed their decision and pointed out, I'm this award-winning political scientist and I'm a commentator and I post what I think people need to hear. But I told them, they kept escalating it and saying, at 14 days, we will give you an answer in the next 14 days. I said, you have 24 hours before I go public. And then I contacted One American News. They came in with a decision to release my account on the 25th hour. So I have my account
why
back.
We're friends, Carol? There's a reason we're friends. I love you. You're my hero. And I told you that. I know they're saying we're out of time. I guess I'm supposed to say where people can get my books.
Yes.
Anywhere. It was just big time discounted at Amazon. I don't know if that's still holding, but I tell people anywhere you can go. And if you go to mystore.com and use the code Eric, many of my books are there. But the new book, Fish Out of Water, I hope people get a copy. And of course, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Gab, I'm on all that stuff. And you can go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, sign up for the newsletter, because sometimes there's no other way to keep in touch with people. But I'm grateful for your having me on your program. God bless you, my friend.
It's a pleasure. And I will be using my platforms to share your book. I've not read it yet, but I will read it. And I'm sure I will enjoy it as much as your other books. And keep up the good fight.
I'm planning to.
I'll be back after this message from our sponsors.
For those of you who would like to know what exactly our children are facing in their education system, this is a must-read book. It will equip you and prepare you to make decisions about your child's health, about your child's education. So I want to encourage every one of you to grab a copy of Dr. Swain's book and join with me and Carol on the front lines in this critical time to eradicate the liberal abduction of our children.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Conversations. Wasn't Eric Metaxas awesome? I'm so excited about his new book and also the work he does in the world. You'll want to get a copy of Fish Out of Water by Eric Metaxas. And also make sure you tune in to Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. Tell your friends and your neighbors about the show and follow us on social media.